"These mice are nothing to do with me," she shouted. "These mice are a pet mice. These mice are quite obviously belonging to some repellent little child in the hotel. A boy it will be first, certainly, because girls are not keeping pet mice." "A boy!" cried the witches. "A filthy, smelthy little boy. We'll swipe him. We'll swice him. We'll have his stripes for breakfast." "Silence!" shouted the Grand High Witch, raising her hands. "You know perfectly well you must do nothing to draw attention to yourselves while you are living in this hotel. Let us by all means get rid of this evil-smelling little squirt. But we must do it all quietly as possible, for are we not all of us the most respectable ladies of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children?" "What do you suggest then, oh brainy one?" they cried out. "How shall we dispose of this small pile of filth?" "They are talking about me," I thought. "These females are actually talking about how to kill me." I began to sweat. "Wherever he is not important," announced the Grand High Witch. "Leave him to me. I shall smell him out and turn him into a mackerel and have him dished up for supper." "Bravo!" cried the witches. "Cut off his head and chop off his tail and dry him in hot butter." You can imagine that none of this was making me feel very uncomfortable. William and Mary were still running around on the platform, and I saw the Grand High Witch aim a swift running kick at William. She got him right on the point of her toe and sent him flying. She did the same to Mary. Her aim was extraordinary. She would have made a great football player. Both mice crashed against the wall, and for a few moments they lay stunned. Then they got to their feet and screamed away. "Attention again!" the Grand High Witch was shouting. "I will now give you the recipe for concocting Formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker. Get out pencils and paper." Handbags were opened all over the room, and notebooks were fished out. "Give us the recipe, oh brainy one," cried the audience impatiently. "Tell us the secret." "First," said the Grand High Witch, "I had to find something that would cause the children to become very small very quickly." "And what was that?" cried the audience. "That part was simple," said the Grand High Witch, "and all you have to do, if you are wishing to make a child very small, is to look at him through the wrong end of a telescope." "She's a wonder," cried the audience. "Who else would have thought of a thing like that?" "So, you take the wrong end of the telescope," continued the Grand High Witch, "and you boil it until it gets off." "How long does that take?" they asked her. 21 hours of boiling," answered the Grand High Witch. "And while this is going on, you take exactly 45 brown mice and you chop off their tails. with a carving knife, and you fry the tails in hair oil until they are nice and crisp. What do we do with all those mice who have had their tails chopped off? Asked the audience. You simmer them produce for an hour, came the answer. But listen to me. So far, I have only given you the easy part of the recipe. The really difficult problem is to put in something that will have a genuine delayed action result, something that can be eaten by children on a certain day, but which will not start working on them until 9 o'clock the next morning when they arrive at school. What did you come up with, oh brainy one? They called out. Tell us the great secret. The secret, announced the Grand High Witch triumphantly, is an alarm clock. An alarm clock, they cried, is a stroke of genius. Of course it is. The Grand High Witch. If you set a 24-hour alarm clock today, and at exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow, it will go off. But we will need 5 million alarm clocks, cried the audience. We will need one of each child. Idiots, shouted the Grand High Witch. If you are voting a steak, you do not cook the whole cow. It is the same with alarm clocks. One clock will make enough for 1,000 children. Here's what you do. You set your alarm clock to go off at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Then you roast in the oven until it is crisp and tender. Are you writing this down? We are, your greatness, we are, they cried. Next, said the Grand High Witch, you take your boiled telescope and your fried mouse tails and your cooked mice and your roasted alarm clock, and all together you put them into the mixer. Then you mix them at full speed. This will give you a nice thick paste. While the mixer is still mixing, you must add to it in the yolk of Fun-Cron, this egg. A counterattack, cried the audience. We shall do that. Underneath all the glamour that was going on, I heard a witch in the back row saying to her neighbor, I'm telling a bit old to go bird's nesting. Those ruddy gruntles away nest away high up. So you mix the eggs, the Grand High Witch went on, and one after the other. You also mix in the following items: the claw of a crab cruncher, the beak of a blabble niche, and snout of a grubble squid, and the tongue of cat springer. I trust you are not having any trouble finding those. Not at all, they cried out. We will spare the blabber niche and trap the crunch buncher and shoot the grubble skirt and catch the cat springer and his burrow. Excellent, said the Grand High Witch. When you have mixed everything together in the mixer, you will have a most marvelous looking green liquid. Put one drop, just one teachy droplet on this liquid into a chocolate or a sweet at 9 o'clock. The next morning The child who ate it will turn into a mouse in 26 seconds. But one word of warning: never increase the dose, never put more than 1 drop into each sweet or chocolate, and never give more than 1 sweet or chocolate to each child. An overdose of delayed action mouse maker will mess up the timing of the alarm clock and cause the child to turn into a mouse too early. A large overdose might even have an instant effect, and you wouldn't want that, would you? You wouldn't want the children turning into mice right there in your sweet shops. That would give the game away, so be very careful. Do not overdose. Bruno Jenkins disappears. The Grand High Witch was starting to talk again. "I'm now going to prove to you," she said, "that this recipe is working to perfection. You understand, of course, that you can set the alarm clock to go off at any time you like. It does not have to be 9 o'clock. So yesterday I am personally preparing a small quantity of the magic formula in order to give you a public demonstration. But I am making one small change in the recipe. Before I am roasting the alarm clock, I am setting it to go off. Not at 9 o'clock this morning, but at 3:30 the next afternoon. Which means 3:30 this afternoon. And that," she said, glancing at her wristwatch, "it is precisely 7 minutes' time." The audience of witches was listening intently, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. "So what am I doing yesterday with this magic liquid?" asked the Grand High Witch. "I will tell you what I am going to do. I am putting 1 droplet of it into a very squishy chocolate bar, and I am giving this bar to a repulsive, smelly little boy who is skating around the lobby of the hotel." The Grand High Witch paused. The audience remained silent, waiting for her to go on. "I watched this repulsive little brood gobbling up the squishy bar of chocolate, and when he had finished, I said to him, 'Was that good?' He said it was great. So I said to him, 'Would you like some more?' And he said, 'Yes.' So I said, 'I will give you 6 more chocolate bars like that if you will meet me in the ballroom of this hotel at 3:25 tomorrow afternoon.'" "6 bars!" cried greedy little swine. "I'll be there. You bet I'll be there." "So the stage is set," shouted the Grand High Witch. "The proof of the pudding is about to begin. Do not forget that before I am roasting the alarm clock yesterday, I am setting it for 3:30 today. It is now," she glanced again at her watch, "it is now exactly 25 minutes past 3, and the nasty little stinker who will be turning into a mouse in 5 minutes. Time should at this very moment be standing outside the doors. And by gum, she was absolutely right. The boy, whoever he might be, was already rattling the door handle and banging on the doors with his feet. "Quick!" shrieked the Grand High Witch. "Put on your wigs, put on your gloves, put on your shoes." There was a great rustle and bustle of putting on wigs and gloves and shoes, and I saw the Grand High Witch herself reach for her face mask and put it on over that revolting face of hers. It was astonishing how that mask transformed her. All of a sudden, she became at once again a rather pretty young lady. "Let me in," came the boy's voice from behind the doors. "Where are those chocolate bars you promised me? I'm here to collect. Dish them out." "He's not only smelly, he's also greedy," said the Grand High Witch. "Remove the chains from the doors and let him come in." The extraordinary thing about the mask was that its lips moved quite naturally when she spoke. You really couldn't see it was a mask at all. One of the witches leapt to her feet and unfastened the chains. She opened the two huge doors. Then I heard her saying, "Why, hello, little man, how lovely to see you. You have come for your chocolate bars, have you not? They are all ready for you. Do come in." A small boy wearing a white t-shirt and grey shorts and gumshoes entered the room. I recognized him at once. He was called Bruno Jenkins, and he was staying in the hotel with his parents. I didn't care for him. He was one of those boys who is always eating something whenever you met him. Meet him in the hotel lobby and he is stuffing sponge cake into his mouth. Pass him in the corridor and he is fishing potato crisps out of the bag by the festival. Catch sight of him in the hotel garden and he is wolfing a dairy milk bar and has two more sticks out of his trousers pocket. What's more, Bruno never stopped boasting about how his father made more money than my father and that they own 3 cars. But worse than that, yesterday morning I had found him kneeling on the flagstones of the hotel terrace with a magnifying glass in his hand. There was a column of On's machine across one of those glass stones, and Bruno Jenkins was focusing the sun through this magnifying glass and roasting the ants one by one. "I like watching them burn," he said. "That's horrible," I cried. "Stop doing this. Let's see you stop me," he said. At that point, I had pushed him with my all might and he had crashed sideways on the flagstones. His magnifying glass has splintered into many pieces, and he had leapt up shrieking, "My father is going to get you for this." Then he had run off, presumably to find his wealthy dad. That was the last time I had seen Bruno Jenkins until now. I doubt very much that he was about to turn into a mouse, although I must confess that I was secretly hoping it might happen. Either way, I didn't envy him being up there in front of all those witches. "Darling boy," cooed the Grand High Witch from up on the platform, "I have your chocolates all ready for you. Do come up here first and say hello to all these lovely ladies." Her voice was quite different now. It was soft and gentle and absolutely dripping with syrup. Bruno was looking a bit bewildered, but he allowed himself to be led up onto the platform, where he stood beside the Grand High Witch and said, "Okay, where are my 6 bars chocolate?" I saw the witch who had led him in quietly putting the chain back on the door handles. Bruno didn't notice it. He was too busy asking for his chocolate. "The time is now 1 minute before 3:30, announced the Grand High Witch. "What's the heck's going on?" Bruno asked. He wasn't frightened, but he wasn't looking exactly comfortable either. "What is this?" he said. "Give me my chocolate." 30 seconds to go," cried the Grand High Witch, gripping Bruno by the arm. Bruno shook himself clear and stared at her. She stared back at him, smiling with the lips of her mask. Every witch in the audience was staring at Bruno. 20 seconds, cried the Grand High Witch. "Give me the chocolate," shouted Bruno, becoming suddenly suspicious. "Give me the chocolate and let me out of here." 15 seconds, cried the Grand High Witch. "Will one of you crazy punks kindly tell me what is all this about?" shouted Bruno. 10 seconds, cried the Grand High Witch. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have ignition. I could have sworn I heard an alarm clock ringing. I saw Bruno jump. He jumped as though someone had stuck a headpin deep into his bottom, and he yelled, "Ow!" He jumped so high that he landed on a small table up there on the stage, and he started hopping about on the top of his table, waving his arms and yelling his head off. Then suddenly he became silent. His whole body stiffened. "The alarm has gone off," shrieked the Grand High Witch. "The mouse maker is beginning to work." She started hopping about one of the platform and clapping her gloves hands together, and then she shouted out, "This smelly brat, that filthy scum, this horrid little loose, would very, very soon become a lovely little mouse." Bruno was getting smaller by the second. I could see him shrinking. Now his clothes seemed to be disappearing, and brown fur was growing all of his body. Suddenly he had a tail, and he had whiskers. Now He had 4 feet. It was all happening so quickly. It was a matter of seconds only, and all at once he wasn't there anymore. A small brown mouse was running around on the tabletop. "Bravo!" yelled the audience. "She's done it! It works! It's fantastic! It's colossal! It is the great... You're a miracle, oh brainy one!" They were all standing up and clapping and cheering, and the Grand High Witch produced a mouse trap from the folds of her dress and started to see it. "Oh no," I thought, "I don't want to see this. Bruno Jenkins may have been a bit of a stinker, but I'm dashed if I want to watch him having his head chopped off." "Where is he?" snapped the Grand High Witch, searching the platform. "Where has the mouse got to?" She couldn't find him. Clever Bruno must have jumped down off the table and screamed one of this corner, or 7 down a small hole. Thank heavens for that. "It matters not," shouted the Grand High Witch. "Silence and sit down." The Ancient Ones. The Grand High Witch stood on the very center of the platform, and those dangerous eyes of hers traveled slowly around the audience of witches who were sitting so meekly before her. "All those over 70 put up your hands," she barked suddenly. 7 or 8 hands went up in the air. "It comes to me," said the Grand High Witch, "that you ancient ones will not be able to climb his trees in search of Gruntle's eggs." "We won't, your greatness, we're afraid we won't," chanted the Ancient Ones. "Nor will you be able to catch the crab brancher who lives high up on rocky cliffs," the Grand High Witch went on. "I can't exactly see you sprinting after the speedy cat sprinter either, or diving into the deep waters to spear the bubbles niche, or striding the bleak moors with a gun under your arm to shoot the crop squirt. You are too old and feeble for those things." "We are," shouted the Ancient Ones. "We are, we are." "You Ancient Ones have served me well over many years," said the Grand High Witch, "and I do not wish you deny the pleasure of bumping off a few thousand children each because you have become old and feeble. I have therefore prepared personally with my own hands a limited quantity of delayed action mouse maker, which I will distribute to the Ancient Ones before you leave the hotel." "Oh, thank you," cried the old witches. "You are far too good to us, your grandness. You are so kind and thoughtful. Here is a sample of what I am giving to you," shouted the Grand High Witch. She finished a round in a pocket of her dress and brought out a very small bottle. She held it up and shouted, "In this tiny bottle is 500 doses of mouse maker. is enough to turn 500 children into mice. I could see that the bottle was made of dark blue glass, and that it was very small, about the same size as the ones you can buy at the chemist with nose drops with them. Each of you ancient ones will get 2 of these bottles, she shouted. Thank you, oh most generous and thoughtful one, chorused the ancient witches. Not one drop will be wasted. Each of us will promise to squish and squelp and squiggle 1,000 children. Our meeting is over, announced the Grand High Witch. Here is the timetable for the remainder of your stay in this hotel. Right now, we must all go out to the Sunshine Terrace and have a tea with that ridiculous manager. Next, at 6 o'clock tonight, those witches who are too old to climb trees after Grundle's eggs will report to my room to receive 2 bottles each of Mouse Maker. My room number is 454. Do not forget it. Then, at 8 o'clock, all of you will assemble into the dining room for supper. We are the lovely ladies of the RSPCC, and they are setting up 2 long tables specially for us. But do not forget to put the cotton plugs up your noses. That dining room will be full of filthy little children, and without the nose plugs, the stink will be unbearable. Apart from that, remember to behave normally all the times. Is everything clear? Any question? I have one question, Your Grandness, said a voice in the audience. What happened if one of the chocolates we are giving away in our shops get eaten by a grown-up? That's too bad for the grown-up, said the Grand High Witch. This meeting is over, she shouted. Out you go. The witches stood up and began gathering their things together. I was watching them through the crack and hoping to heaven they would hurry up and leave so that I might be safe at last. Wait, shrieked one of the witches in the back row. Hold everything. Her shrieking voice echoed through the ballroom like a trumpet. All the witches suddenly stopped and turned and looked towards the speaker. She was one of the taller witches, and I could see her standing there with her head tilted back and her nose in the air, and she was sucking a great long breath of air through those curvy pink seashell nostrils of hers. Wait, she shouted again. What is it? The others cried out. Dog's droppings, she yelled, just when I got a whiff of dog's droppings. Surely not, the others shouted. There couldn't be. Yes, yes, shouted the first witch. There is again, It is not strong, but it's here. I mean, it's there. It is definitely somewhere not too far away. What's going on there? Shouted the Grand High Witch, glaring down from the platform. Mildred just got a whiff of dog's droppings, your grandness, someone called back to her. What rubbish is this? The Grand High Witch. She has dog's droppings on their brain. There are no children in this room. Hang on, cried the witch called Mildred. Hang on, everybody, don't move. I'm getting it again. Her huge curvy nose holes were wading in and out like a pair of fishtails. It's getting stronger. It's hitting me harder now. Can't the rest of you smell it? All the noses of all the witches in that room went up in the air, and all the nostrils began to suck and sniff. She's right, cried another voice. She's absolutely right. Dog's droppings. It is strong and full. In a matter of seconds, the entire assembly of witches had taken up the dreaded cry of dog's droppings. Dog's droppings, they shouted. The room is full of it. Pooh, pooh! Why did we not smell it before? It stinks like a sewer. Some little swine must be hiding not so very far away from her. Find it, screamed the Grand High Witch. Track it down, rattle it out, follow your nose till you get in. The hairs of my head were standing up like the bristles of a nail brush, and a cold sweat was breaking out all over me. Rattle it out, its small lump of dung, screeched the Grand High Witch. Don't let it escape. If it is in here, it has observed the most secret things. It must be exterminated immediately. Metamorphosis. I remember thinking to myself, there is no escape for me now. Even if I make a run for it and manage to dodge the lot of them, I still won't get out because the doors are chained and locked. I'm finished. I'm done for it. Oh, Grandmama, what are they going to do with me? I looked round and I saw a hideous, painted and powdered witch's face staring down at me. And the face opened his mouth and yelled triumphantly. It's here! It's behind the screen! Come and get it! The witch reached out a gloved hand and grabbed me by the hair, but I twisted free and jumped away. I ran, oh, how I ran! The sheer terror of it all put wings on my feet. I flew around the outside of the great ballroom, and not one of them had a chance of catching me. As I came level with the doors, I paused and tried to open them, but the big chain was on them and they didn't even rattle. The witches were not bothering to chase me. They simply stood there in small groups, watching me and knowing for certain that there was no way I could escape. Several of them were holding their noses with gloved fingers, and their cries of "Pooh, what a stink! We can't stand this much longer." "Catch it then, you idiots!" screamed the Grand High Witch from up upon the platform. Spread out in a line across the room, and close it on and grab it. Corner this filthy little gumbo and seize in and bring it up her to come. The witches spread out as they were old. They were advanced toward me, some from one end, some from the other, and some came down the middle between the rows of empty chairs. They were bound to get me now. They had me cornered. From sheer and absolute terror, I began to scream. "Help!" I screamed, turning my head towards the doors in the rope that somebody outside might hear me. "Help! Help! Help!" "Get it!" shouted the Grand High Witch. "Grab hold of it! Stop it yelling!" They rushed at me then, and about 5 of them grabbed by me the arms and legged and lifted me clear off the ground. I went on screaming, but one of them clapped a gloved hand over my mouth, and that stopped me. "Bury it here!" shouted the Grand High Witch. "Bring the spine little vamp up here to me." I was carried onto the platform with my arms and legs held tight in my many hands, and I lay there suspended in the air, facing the ceiling. I saw the Grand High Witch standing over me, grinning at me in the most horrible way. She held up the small blue bottle of mouse maker, and she said, "Now for a little medicine. Hold his nose to make him open his mouth." Strong fingers pinched my nose. I kept my mouth closed tight and held my breath. But I couldn't do it for long. My chest was bursting. I opened my mouth to get one big quick breath of air, and as I did so, the Grand High Witch poured the entire contents of the little down by my throat. Oh, the pain and the fire! It felt as though a kettleful of boiling water had been poured into my mouth. My throat was going up in flames. Then, very quickly, the frightful burning, searing, scorching feeling started spreading down into my chest, into my tummy, and on into my arms and legs, and all over my body. I screamed and screamed, but once again the gloved hands was clapped over my lips. The next thing I felt was my skin beginning to tighten. How else can I describe it? I was quite literally a tightening of my toes. I felt as though I was a balloon and somebody was twisting the top of the balloon and twisting, and the balloon was getting smaller and smaller, and the skin was getting tighter and tighter. As soon I was going to burst. Then the squeezing began. This time I was inside a suit of iron, and somebody was turning a screw. and with each turn of the screw, the iron suit became smaller and smaller, so that I was squeezed like an orange into a pulpy mess with the juice running out of my sides. After the three came a fierce sprinkling sensation. All of my skin, or what was left of my skin, as though tiny needles were forcing their way out through the surface of the skin from the inside, and this I realized now was the growth of a mouse fur. Far away in the distance, I heard the voice of the Grand High Witch yelling, 500 dose! This stinking little carbuncle has had 500 doses, and the alarm clock has been smashed, and now we're having instantaneous action. I heard clapping and cheering, and I remember thinking, I'm not myself any longer. I have gone clear out of my own skin. I noticed that the floor was only an inch from my nose. I noticed also a pair of little furry front paws resting on the floor. I was able to move those paws. They were mine. At a moment, I realized that I was not a little boy any longer. I was a mouse. Not for the mouse trap. I heard the Grand High Witch yelling, I've got it right here, and here is a piece of cheese. But I wasn't going to wait for that. I was off across platform. Like a streak of lightning, I was astonished at my own speed. I leapt over Witch's feet right and then, and into a time of all I was down the steps and onto the floor of the ballroom itself, and skittering off among the rows of chairs. Then I especially liked was the fact that I made no sound at all as I ran. I was a swift and silent mover, and quite amazingly, the pain had all gone now. I was feeling quite remarkably well. It is not a bad thing after all, I thought to myself, to be tiny as well as speedy when there is a bunch of dangerous females after your blood. I selected the back leg of a chair and squeezed up against it and kept very still. In the distance, the Grand High Witch was shouting, Leave the little stinkbot alone. It is not worth bothering about. It is only a mouse now. Something else will soon catch it. Let us get out of here. The meeting is over. Unlock the doors and show off to the Sunshine Terrace to have tea with that idiotic manager. Bruno. I peeped round the leg on the chair and watched the hundreds of witches' feet walking out through the doors of the ballroom. When they had all gone and the place was absolutely silent, I began to move cautiously about on the floor. Suddenly, I remembered Bruno. He must surely be around here somewhere too. Bruno, I called out. I wasn't seriously expecting that I would be able to speak at all now that I had become a mouse. So I got the shock of my life when I heard my own voice, my own perfectly normal, rather loud voice, coming out of my tiny mouth. It was wonderful. I was thrilled. I tried it again. "Bruno Jenkins, where are you?" I called out. "If you can hear me, give me a shout." My voice was exactly the same and just as loud as I had been when I was a boy. "Hey there, Bruno Jenkins," I called. "Where are you?" There was no answer. I pottered about between the seat legs, trying to get used to being so close to the ground. I decided I rather liked it. You are probably wondering why I wasn't depressed at all. I found myself thinking, what's so wonderful about being a little boy anyway? Why is that necessarily any better than being a mouse? I know what mice get hunted, and they sometimes get poisoned and caught in traps. But little boys sometimes get killed too. Little boys can be run over by motor cars, or they can die of some awful illnesses. Little boys can have go to school. Mice can't. Mice don't have to pass any exams. Mice don't have to worry about money. Mice, as far as I can see, have only two enemies, humans and cats. My grandmother is a human, but I know for certain that she will always love me whoever I am. And she never, thank goodness, keeps a cat. When mice grow up, they don't even have to go too far and fight against other mice. Mice, I felt pretty certain, all like each other. People don't. Yes, I told myself, I don't think that it's all a bad thing to be a mouse. I was wandering around the ballroom floor, thinking about all this when I spotted another mouse. It was crouching on the floor, holding a piece of bread in its front paws and nibbling away at it with great gusto. It had to be Bruno. "Hello, Bruno," I said. He glanced up at me for about 2 seconds, then went right on guzzling. "What have you found?" I asked him. "Once of them dropped it," he answered. "It's a fish paste sandwich. Pretty good." He just spoke with a perfectly normal voice. One would have expected that a mouse, if it was going to talk at all, would you do with the smallest and the squeakiest voice you could imagine. It was certainly terrifically funny to hear the voice of the rather loud-mouthed Bruno coming out of that tiny mouse's throat. "Listen, Bruno," I said, "now what we are both mice, I think we ought to start thinking a bit about the future." He stopped eating and stared at me with small black eyes. "What do you mean we?" he said. "The fact that you are a mouse has nothing to do with me." "But you're a mouse too, Bruno." "Don't be a fool," he said. I'm not a mouse. I'm afraid you are, Bruno. Certainly I'm not, he shouted. Why are you insulting me? I haven't been rude to you. Why do you call me a mouse? Don't you know what's happened to you? I said. What on earth are you talking about? Bruno said. I have to inform you, I said, that not very long ago the witches turned you into a mouse. Then they did it to me. You're lying, he cried. I am not a mouse. If you hadn't been so busy guzzling that sandwich, I said you would have noticed your hairy paws. Take a look at them. Bruno looked down at his paws. He jumped. Good grief, he cried. I am a mouse. You wait till my father hears about this. He may think it is an improvement, I said. I don't want to be a mouse, Bruno shouted, jumping up and down. I refuse to be a mouse. I am Bruno Jenkins. There are worse things than being a mouse, I said. You can live in a hole. I don't want to live in a hole, Bruno shouted. And you can creep into the larder at night, I said, and nibble through all the packets of raisin and cornflakes and chocolate biscuits and everything else you can find. You can stay there all night, eating yourself silly. That's what mice do. Now that's a thought, Bruno said, perking up a bit. And how am I going to open the door of the fridge to get at the cold chicken and all the leftovers? That's something I do every evening at home. Maybe your rich father will get you a special little mouse fridge all to yourself, I said. One that you can open. You say a witch did this to me? Bruno said. Which witch? The one who you gave you the chocolate bar in the hotel lobby yesterday. I told him. Don't you remember? A filthy old cow, he shouted. I'll get her for this. Where is she? Who is she? Forget it, I said. You don't have a hope. Your biggest problem at the moment is your parents. How are they going to take this? Will they treat you with sympathy and kindness? Bruno considered this for a moment. I think, he said, that my father is going to be put out. And your mother? She's terrified for mice, Bruno said. Then you've got a problem, haven't you? My grandmother will understand perfectly, I said. She knows all about witches. Bruno took another bite of his sandwich. What do you suggest? He said. I suggest we both go first of all and consult my grandmother, I said. She'll know exactly what to do. I moved towards the door, which were standing open. Bruno, still grasping part of the sandwich in one paw, followed after me. When we get out into the corridor, I said, we are going to run like mad. Stick close to the wall of the way and follow me. Do not talk and do not let anyone see you. Don't forget that just about anyone too catches of you will try to kill you. I snatched the sandwich out of his paw and threw it away. Here goes, I said. Keep behind me. Hello, Grandmama. As soon as I was out of the ballroom, I took off like a flash. I streaked down the corridor, went through the lounge and the reading room and the library and the drawing room and came to the stairs. Up the stairs I went, jumping quite easily from one to other, keeping well in against the wall all the time. Are you with me, Bruno? I whispered. Right here, he said. My grandmother's room and my own were on the 5th floor. I was quite a climb, but we made it without meeting a single person on the way, because everyone was using the lift. On the 5th floor, I raced along the corridor to the door of my grandmother's room. A pair of her shoes was standing outside the door to be cleaned. Bruno was alongside me. What do we do now? He said. Suddenly, I caught sight of a chambermaid coming along the corridor towards us. I saw at once that he was one who had reported me to the manager for keeping white mice. No, therefore, the sort of person I wanted to meet in my present condition. Quick, I said to Bruno, hide in one of those shoes. I hopped into one shoe and Bruno hopped into the other. I waited for the maid to walk past us. She didn't. Then she came to the shoes. She bent down and picked them up. In doing this, she put her hand right inside the one I was hiding in. Wearing off one of her fingers touched me. I bit it. I was a silly thing to do, but I did it instantly, without thinking. The maid let out a scream that must have been heard by all ships far out of the English Channel, and she stopped the shoes and ran like the wind down the corridor. My grandmother's doors opened. What on earth is going on here? She said. I darted between her legs into her room and Bruno followed me. Close the door, Grandmama, I cried. Please hurry. She looked around and saw 2 small brown mice on the carpet. Please close it, I said, and this time she actually saw me talking and recognized my voice. She froze and became absolutely motionless. Every part of her body, her fingers and hands and arms and head, became suddenly as stiff as a marble statue. Her face turned even paler than marble, and her eyes were stretched so wide so I could see whites around of them. Then she started to tremble. I thought she was going to faint and I'll fall over. Please close the door quickly, Grandmama, I said. That awful maid might come in. She somehow managed to gather herself together enough to close the door. She leaned against it, staring down at me, white-faced and shaking all over. I saw tears beginning to come out of her eyes and go dribbling down her cheeks. Don't cry, Grandmama, I said. Things could be a lot worse. I did get away from them. I'm still alive. So is Bruno. Very slowly, she bent down and picked me up with one hand. Then she picked Bruno up with the other hand and put us both on the table. There was a bowl of bananas in the center of the table, and Bruno jumped straight into and began tearing away with his teeth at one of the banana skins to get at the fruit inside. Grandmama cast the arm of her chair to steady herself, but her eyes never left me. Sit down, cried dear Grandmama, I said. She collapsed into her chair. Oh, my darling, she murmured, and now the tears were really streaming down her cheeks. Oh, my poor sweet darling, what have they done to you? I know what they've done, Grandmama, and I know what I am, but the funny thing is that I don't honestly feel especially bad about it. I don't even feel angry. In fact, I feel rather good. I know I'm not a boy any longer, and I never will be again, but I'll be quite all right as long as there is always you to look after me. I was not just trying to console her, I was being absolutely honest about the news I felt. You may think it odd that I wasn't weeping myself. It was odd. I simply can't explain it. Of course, I'll do and look after you, my grandmother murmured. Who is that other one? That was a boy called Bruno Jenkins. I told her they got him first. My grandmother took a new long black cigar out of a case in her handbag and put it into her mouth. Then she got out a box of matches. She struck a match, but her fingers were shaking so much that the flame kept missing the end of the cigar. When she got in, lit and lost, she took a long pull and sucked in the smoke. That seemed to calm her down a bit. Where did it happen? She whispered. Where is the witch now? Is she in the hotel? Grandmama, I said, it wasn't just one. It was hundreds. They are all over the place. They are right here in the hotel, this very moment. She leaned forward and stared at me. You don't mean to tell me they're holding the annual meeting right here in the hotel? They've held it, Grandmama. It finished. I heard it all. And all of them, including the Grand High Witch herself, are downstairs now. They are pretending they are the Royal Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. They are all having tea with the manager. And they caught you? They smelled me out, I said. Tucked dropping, was it? I'm afraid so. But it wasn't strong. They very nearly didn't smell me because I hadn't had a bath for ages. Children should never have baths, my grandmother said. It's a dangerous habit. I agree, Grandmama. She paused, sucking at her cigar. Do you really mean to tell me that they are now all downstairs having tea? She said. I'm certain of it, Grandmama. There was another pause. I could see the old glint of excitement slowly coming back into my grandmother's eyes, and all of a sudden she sat up very straight in her chair and said sharply, Tell me everything right from the beginning, and please hurry. I took a deep breath and began to talk. I told about going to the ballroom and hiding behind the screen to my mouse training. I told about the notice saying the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. I told her all about the woman coming in and sitting down, and about the small woman who appeared on the stage and took off her mask. But when it came to describing what her face looked like underneath the mask, I simply couldn't find the right words. It was horrible, Grandmama, I said. Oh, it was so horrible. I was like something that was going rotten. Go on, my grandmother said. Don't stop. Then I told her about all the others taking off their wigs and their gloves and their shoes, and how I saw before me a sea of bald, pimply heads, and how the women's fingers had little claws, and how their feet had no toes. My grandmother had come forward now in her armchair, so that she was sitting right on the edge of it. Both her hands were cupped over the gold knob of the stick that she always used when walking, and she was staring at me with eyes as bright as 2 stars. Then I told her now how the Grand High Witch had shot out the fiery white-hot sparks, and how they had turned one on the other witches into a puff of smoke. I've heard about that, my grandmother cried out excitedly, but I never quite believed it. You are the first non-witch ever to see it happening. The Grand High Witch most famous punishment. It is the Grand High Witch makes a rule to fry at least one witch at each annual meeting. She does it in order to keep the rest of them on their toes. But they don't have any toes, Grandmama. I know they don't, my darling, but please go on. So then I told my grandmother about delayed action mouse maker, and when I came to the bit around turning all the children of England into mice, she actually leaped out of her chair shouting, I knew it! I knew they were brewing up something tremendous. We've got to stop them, I said. She turned and stared at me. You can't stop witches, she said. You just look at the power that terrible Grand High Witch has in her eyes alone. She could kill any of us at any time with those white-hot sparks of hers. You saw it yourself. Even so, Grandmama, we've still got to stop her from turning all the children of England into mice. You haven't quite finished, she said. Tell me about Bruno. How did they get him? I described how Bruno Jenkins had come in and how I actually had seen him with my own eyes being shrunk into a mouse. My grandmother looked at Bruno, who was guzzling away in the bowl of bananas. Why does he never stop eating? She asked. Never, I said. Can you explain something to me, Grandmama? I'll try, she said. She reached out and lifted me off the table and put me on her lap. Very gently, she began stroking the soft fur along my back. I felt nice. What is it you want to ask me, my darling? She said. The thing I don't understand, I said, is how Bruno and I still able to talk and think just as we did before. It's quite simple, my grandmother said. All they've done is to shrink you and give you legs and furry coat, but they haven't been able to change you into 100% mouse. You are still yourself in everything except your appearance. You've still got your own mind and your own brain and your own voice, and thanks goodness for that. I'm not really ordinary a mouse at all, I said. I'm a sort of mouse person. Quite right, she said. You are human in mouse's clothing. You are very special. We sat there in silence for a few moments while my grandmother went on stroking me very gently with one finger and putting her cigar with the other hand. The only sound in the room was made by Bruno as he attacked the bananas in the bowl. But I wasn't doing nothing as I lay there on her lap. I was thinking like mad. My brain was so whistling as I had never whistled before. Grandmama, I said, I may have a bit of an idea. Yes, my darling, what is it? The Grand High Witch told them her room was number 454, right? Right, she said. Well, my room is number 554. It's on the 5th floor, so hers 454 will be on the 1st floor. That is correct, my grandmother said. Then, don't you think it is possible that room 454 is directly underneath 554? That's more than likely, she said. These modern hotels are all built like boxes of bricks. But what if it is? Would you please take me out to my balcony so I can look down? I said. All the rooms in the hotel, magnificent, had small private balconies. My grandmother carried me through into my own bedroom and out onto my balcony. We both peered down to the balcony immediately below. Now, if this is her room, I said, then I'll bet I could climb down there somehow and get in. And can't get caught all over again, my grandmother said. I won't allow it. At this moment, I said, all the witches are down on the Sunshine Terrace having tea with the manager. The Grand High Witch probably won't be back until 6 o'clock or just before. That's when she's going to dish out supplies. Oh, what fool formula to the ancient ones who are too old to climb trees after Grundle's eggs. What if you did manage to get into the room? My grandmother said. What then? Then I should try to find a place where she keeps her supply of delayed action mouse market, and if I succeed then, I would steal 1 bottle of it and bring it back here. Could you carry it? I think so. It's a very small bottle. I'm frightened of that stuff, my grandmother said. What would you do with it if you did manage to get it? 1 bottle is enough for 500 people, I said. That would give each and every witch down their double dose at least. We could turn them all into mice. My grandmother jumped about an inch in the air. We were out of my balcony, and there was a drop of about 1,000,000 feet below us, and I felt very nearly bounced out of her hand over the railings when she jumped. Be careful with me, Grandmama, I said. What idea, she cried. It's fantastic. It's tremendous. You're a genius, my darling. Wouldn't be something, I said. Wouldn't that really be something? We'd get rid of every witch in England in one swoop, she cried, and the Grand High Witch in the bargain. We've got to try it, I said. Listen, she said, nearly dropping me over on the balcony once again in her excitement. If we brought this off, it will be the greatest triumph in the whole history of witchery. There's lots of work to do, I said. Of course there's a lot of work to do, she said. Just for a start, supposing you did manage to get hold of one of those bottles, how would you get into their food? Well, work that out later, I said. Let's try to get the stuff first. How can we find out for sure? That's her room below us. We shall check out it immediately, my grandmother cried. Come along, there is not a second to waste. Carrying me in one hand, she went bustling out of the bedroom and along the corridor, banging her stick on the carpet with each step she took. We went down the stairs, one flight to the 4th floor. The bedroom on either side of the corridor had their numbers painted on the doors in gold. Here it is, my grandmother cried. Number 454. She cried and she tried the door. I was locked, of course. She looked up and down the long empty hotel corridor. I do believe you are right, she said. This room is almost certainly directly below. She marched back along the corridor, counting the number of doors from the Grand High Witch room to the staircase. There were 6. She climbed back up to the 5th floor and repeated the exercise. She is directly below you, my grandmother cried. Her room is right below us. She cried and carried me back into my own bedroom and went up once again onto the balcony. "That's her balcony down here," she said. "And what's more, the door from her balcony into her bedroom is wide open. How are you going to climb down?" "I don't know," I said. "Our room were in the front of the hotel, and they looked down on the beach and the sea. Immediately below my balcony, thousands of feet below, I could see a fence of spiked railings. If I fell, I'd be goner." "I've got it!" my grandmother cried. With me in her hand, she rushed back into her own room and began rummaging in the chest of drawers. She came out with a ball of blue knitting wool. On the end of it was attached to some needles and a half-finished socks she had been knitting for me. "This is perfect," she said. "I shall put you in a sock and lower you down onto the grand high witch's balcony. We must hurry. Any moment now that monster will be returning to her room." The mouse burglar. My grandmother hustled me back into my own bedroom and out onto the balcony. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I'm going to put you in a sock now." "I hope I can manage this," I said. "I'm only a little mouse." "You'll manage," she said. "Good luck, my darling." She popped me into the sock and started lowering me over the balcony. I crouched inside the sock and held my breath. Through the stitches, I could see out quite clearly, miles below me, the children playing on the beach were the size of beetles. The sock started swinging in the breeze. I looked up and saw my grandmother's head sticking out over the railings of the balcony above. "You're nearly here," she called out. "Here we go. Gently goes it. You are down." I felt a slight bump. "In you go." My grandmother was shouting. "Hurry, hurry, hurry! Search the room!" I jumped out of the sock and ran into the grand high witch's bedroom. There was the same musty smell about the place that I had noticed in the ballroom. I was the strange of witches. It reminded me of the smell inside the men's public lavatory in our local railway station. As far as I could see, the room was tidy enough. There was no sign everywhere that it was inhabited by anyone but an ordinary person. But then there wouldn't be, would there? No witch would be stupid enough to leave anything suspicious lying around for the hotel maid to see. Suddenly, I saw a frog jumping across the carpet and disappearing under the bed. I jumped myself. "Hurry up!" came my grandmother's voice from somewhere high up outside. "Grab the stuff and get out." I started skittering round and trying to search the room. This wasn't so easy. I couldn't, for example, open any of the drawers. I couldn't open the doors of the big wardrobe either. I stopped skittering about. I sat in the middle of the floor and had a think. If the Grand High Witch wanted to hide something top secret, where would she put it? Certainly not in the ordinary drawer, not in the wardrobe either. It was too obvious. I jumped on to the bed to get a better view of the room. Hey, I thought, what about under the mattress? Very carefully, I lowered myself over the edge of the bed and wormed my way underneath the mattress. I had to push forward hard to make any headway, but I kept at it. I couldn't see a thing. I was scrabbling about under the mattress when my head suddenly bumped against something hard inside the mattress above me. I reached up and felt it with my paw. Could it be a big bottle? It was a little bottle. I could trace the shape of it through the clothes of the mattress. And right alongside it, I felt another hand lump, and another. The Grand High Witch must have split open the mattress and put out the bottles inside them, sewing it all up again. I began tearing away frantically at the mattress close above my head with my teeth. My front teeth were extremely sharp, and it didn't take me long to make a small hole. I climbed into the hole and grabbed the bottle by the neck. I pushed it down through the hole in the mattress and climbed out after it. Walking backwards and dragging the bottle behind me, the manager reached the edge of the mattress. I rolled the bottle off the bed onto the carpet. I bounced, but I didn't break. I jumped down off the bed. I examined the little bottle. It was identical to the one that Grand High Witch had had in the ballroom. There was a label on this one, Formula 86. It said, Delayed Action Mouse Maker. Then it said, this bottle contains 500 doses. Eureka! I felt tremendously pleased with myself. 3 frogs came hopping out from under the bed. They crouched on the carpet, staring at me with large black eyes. I stared back at them. Those huge eyes were the saddest things I've ever seen. It suddenly occurred to me that them almost certainly once upon a time they had been children. Those frogs, before the Grand High Witch had got hold of them. I stood there, clutching the bottle and staring at the frogs. Who are you? I asked them. At that moment, I heard a key turning in the lock of the door, and the door burst open, and the Grand High Witch swept into the room. The frogs jumped underneath the bed again in one quick hop. I darted after them, still clutching the bottle, and I ran back against the wall and squeezed it behind in one of the bedposts. I heard feet walking on the carpet. I peeped round the bedpost. The 3 frogs were clustered together under the middle of the bed. Frogs cannot hide like mice. They cannot run like mice either. All they can do, poor things, is to hop about rather clumsily. Suddenly, the Grand High Witch face came into view, peering under the bed. I popped my head back behind the bedpost. "So there you are, my little froggies," I heard her saying. "You can stay where you are until I get to bed tonight. Then I shall throw you out of the window, and the seagulls can have you for supper." Suddenly, very loud and clear, there came the sound of my grandmother's voice through the open balcony door. "Hurry up, my darling. Hurry up, you'd better come out quickly." "Who's calling?" snapped the Grand High Witch. I peeped round the bedpost again and saw her walking across the carpet to the balcony door. "Who is this on my balcony?" she murmured. "Who is this? Who dares to trespass on my balcony?" She went through the door onto the balcony itself. "What is this knitting wool handing down here?" I heard her saying. "Oh, hello," came my grandmother's voice. "I just dropped my knitting over the balcony by mistake, but it's all right. I've got hold on the end of it. I can pull it up by myself. Thank you all the same." I marveled at coolness of her voice. "What were you talking to just now?" snapped the Grand High Witch. "Who were you telling to hurry up and come out quickly?" "I was talking to my little grandson," I heard my grandmother saying. "He's been in the bathroom for hours, and it's time he came out. He sits there reading books, and he forgets completely where he is. Do you have any children, my dear?" "I do not," shouted the Grand High Witch, and she came quickly back to the bedroom, slamming the balcony door behind her. I was cooked. My escape route was closed. I was shut up in the room with the Grand High Witch and 3 terrified frogs. I was just as terrified as the frogs. I was quite sure that if I was spotted, it would be caught and thrown out over the balcony for the seagulls. There came a knock on the bedroom door. "What is this time?" shouted the Grand High Witch. "It is the Ancient Ones," said a meek voice from behind the door. "It is 6 o'clock, and we have to collect the bottles that you promised us, oh your grandness." I saw her crossing the carpet towards the door. The door was opened when I saw a whole lot of feet and shoes beginning to enter the room. They were coming in slowly and hesitantly, as though the owners of those shoes were frightened of entering. Come in," snapped the Grand High Witch. "Do not stand out there dithering in corridor. I don't have all night. I saw my chance. I jumped out from the behind the bedpost and ran like lightning towards the open door. I jumped over several pairs of shoes on the way. In 3 seconds, I was out in the corridor, still clutching the precious bottle to my chest. No one had seen me. There were no shouts of "Mouse, mouse!" All I could hear were the voices of the ancient witches, burbling their silly sentences about how kind your greatness is, and all the rest of it. I went scrambling down the corridor to the stairs and up one flight. I went to the 5th floor and then along the corridor again until I came to the door of my own bedroom. Thank goodness there was no one inside. Using the bottom of the little bottle, I began tapping on the door. Tap, 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 I went. Tap, tap, tap. Would my grandmother hear me? I thought that she must. The bottle made quite a loud tap each time it struck. Tap, 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 tap. Just so long as nobody came along the corridor. But the door didn't open. I decided to take a risk. "Grandma!" I shouted as loudly as possibly could. "Grandma, it's me, let me in." I heard her feet coming across the carpet and the door opened. I went like an arrow. "I've done it!" I cried, jumping up and down. "I've got it, Grandmama. Look, here it is. I've got a whole bottle of it." She closed the door. She bent down and picked me up and hugged me. "Oh, my darling," she cried. "Thank heavens you are safe." She took the little bottle from me and read the label aloud. Formula 86. Delayed action mouse maker. She read, "This bottle contains 500 doses. You brilliant darling boy, you are a wonder. You are Marv. How on earth did you get all of her room?" I nipped out when the ancient witches were coming in, I told her. "I was a bit hairy, Grandmama. I wouldn't want to do it again." "I saw her too," my grandmama said. "I know you did, Grandmama. I heard you talking to each other." "Didn't you think she was absolutely fool?" "She's a murderer," my grandmother said. "She's the most evil woman in the entire world." "Did you see her mask?" I asked. "It's amazing," my grandmother said. "It looks just like a real face, even though I knew it was a mask." I still couldn't tell. "Oh, my darling," she cried, giving me a hug. "I thought I'd never see you again. I'm so happy you got away." Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins meet Bruno. My grandmother carried me back into her own bedroom and put me on the table. She set the precious bottle down beside me. "What time are those witches having supper in the dining room?" she asked. 8 o'clock. She looked at her watch. "It is now 6:10, she said. "We've got until 8 o'clock to work out our next move." Suddenly, her eyes fell upon Bruno. He was still in the banana bowl on the table. He had eaten 3 bananas and was now attacking a 4th. He had become immensely fat. "That's quite enough," my grandmother said, lifting him out of the bowl and putting him on the tabletop. "I think it's time we return this little fellow to the bosom of his family. Don't you agree, Bruno?" Bruno scowled at her. I had never seen a mouse scowl before, but the manager did. "My parents let me eat as such as I want," he said. "I'd rather be with them than with you." "Of course you would," my grandmother said. "Do you know where your parents might be at this moment?" "They are in a lounge not long ago," I said. "I saw them sitting there as we dashed through on our way up here." "Right," my grandmother said. "Let's go and see if they are still there. Do you want to come along?" she added, looking at me. "Yes, please," I said. "I shall put you both in my handbag," she said. "Keep quiet and stay out of sight. If you must peep out now and again, don't show more than your nose." Her handbag was a large, buckly, black leather affair with a tortoise shell clasp. She picked up Bruno and popped us into it. "I shall leave the clasp undone," she said, "but be sure to keep out of sight." I had no intentions of keeping out of sight. I wanted to see everything. I seated myself in a little side pocket inside the bag, near the clasp, and from there I was able to poke my head out whenever I wanted to. "Hey," Bruno called out, "give me the rest of that banana I was eating." "Oh, all right," my grandmother said. "Anything to keep you quiet." She dropped the half-eaten banana in the one bag. Then she slugged the bag over her arm and marched out of the room and went thumping along the corridor with her walking stick. We went down in the lift to the ground floor and made our way through the reading room to the lounge. And there, sure enough, sat Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins in a couple of armchairs with a low, round glass-covered table between them. There were several other groups in there as well, but the Jenkinses were the only couple sitting alone. Mr. Jenkins was reading a newspaper. Mrs. Jenkins was knitting something large and mustard-colored. Only my nose and eyes were above the clasps of my grandmother's handbag, but I had a super view. I could see everything. My grandmother, dressed in black lace, went trampling across the floor of the lounge and huddled in front of the Jenkins table. "Are you Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins?" she asked. Mr. Jenkins looked at her over the top of his newspapers and groaned. "Yes," he said, "I'm Mr. Jenkins. What can I do for you, madam?" "I'm afraid I have some rather alarming news for you," she said. "It's about your son Bruno." "What about Bruno?" Jenkins asked. Mr. Jenkins looked up and went on knitting. "What's the little blighter been up to now?" Mr. Jenkins asked. "Raiding their kitchen, I suppose. It's a bit worse than that," my grandmother said. "Do you think we might go somewhere more private while I tell you about it?" "Private?" Mr. Jenkins said. "Why do we have to be private?" "This is not an easy thing for me to explain," my grandmother said. "I'd much rather we all went up to the room and sat down before I tell you what any more." Mr. Jenkins lowered his paper. Mrs. Jenkins stopped knitting. "I don't want to go up to my room, madam," Mr. Jenkins said. "I'm quite comfortable here, thank you very much." He was a large, coarse man, and he wasn't used to being pushed around by anybody. "Kindly state your business and then leave us alone," he added. He spoke as though he was addressing someone who was trying to sell him a vacuum cleaner at the back door. My poor grandmother, who had been doing her best to be as kind to them as possible, now began to bristle a bit herself. "We really can't talk in here," she said. "There are too many people. It is a rather delicate and personal matter." "I'll talk where I -well want to, madam," Mr. Jenkins said. "Come on now. Out with it. If Bruno has broken a window or smashed your spectacles, they'll pay for the damage, but I'm not budging out of this seat." One or two other groups in the room were beginning to stare at us now. "Where is Bruno, anyway?" Mr. Jenkins said. "Tell him to come here and see me." "He's here already," my grandmother said. "He is in my handbag." She patted a big, floppy leather bag with her walking sticks. "What the heck do you mean he's in your handbag?" Mr. Jenkins shouted. "Are you trying to be funny?" Mr. Jenkins said, very prime. "There is nothing funny about this," My grandmother said, "Your son has suffered a rather unfortunate mishap." "He's always suffering mishap," Mr. Jenkins said. "He suffers from overeating, and then he suffers from wind. You should hear him after supper. He sounds like a brass band. But a good dose of castor's oil soon puts him right again. Where is the little beggar?" "I've already told you," my grandmother said. "He is in my handbag. But I do think it might be better if we went somewhere private before you meet him in his present state." "This woman's mad," Mrs. Jenkins said. "Tell her to go away." "The plain fact is," my grandmother said, "that your son Bruno has been rather drastically altered." "Altered?" shouted Mr. Jenkins. "What the devil do you mean, altered?" "Go away," Mrs. Jenkins said. "You're a silly old woman." "I'm trying to tell you as gently as possible, so that Bruno is really in my handbag," my grandmother said. "My own grandson actually saw them doing it to him." "So who doing what to him, for heaven's sake?" shouted Mr. Jenkins. He had a black moustache which jumped up and down when he shouted. "So the witches turning him into a mouse," my grandmother said. "Call the manager, dear," Mrs. Jenkins said to her husband. "Have this mad woman thrown out of the hotel." And at this point, my grandmother's patience came to an end. She finished the round in her handbag and found Bruno. She lifted him out and dumped him on the glass-topped table. Mr. Jenkins took one look at the fat little brown mouse who was still chewing a bit of banana, and she let out a shriek that rattled the crystals on the chandelier. She sprang out on her chair, yelling, "It's a mouse! Take it away! I can't stand the things!" "It's Bruno," my grandmother said. "You nasty, cheeky old woman," shouted Mr. Jenkins. He started flapping his newspaper at Bruno, trying to sweep him off the table. My grandmother rushed forward and managed to grab hold of him before he was swept away. Mr. Jenkins was still screaming. Her head of Mrs. Jenkins was towering over us and shouting, "Get out of here! How dare you frighten my was like that? Take your filthy mouse away this instant!" "Help!" screamed Mrs. Jenkins. Her face had gone the color of the underside of a fish. "Well, I did my best," my grandmother said. and with it she turned and sailed out of the room, carrying Bruno with her. The plan. When we got back to the bedroom, my grandmother took me both and Bruno out of her handbag and put us on the table. "Why on earth didn't you speak up and tell your father who you were?" she said to Bruno. "Because I had my mouth full," Bruno said. He jumped straight back into the bowl of bananas and went on with his eating. "What a very disagreeable little boy you are," my grandmother said to him. "Not boy," I said. "Mouse." "Quite right, my darling. But we don't have time to worry about him at this moment. We have plans to make in about an hour. And half time all the witches will be going down to supper in the dining room, right?" "Right," I said. "And every one of them had to God be given of dose of mouse maker," she said. "How on earth are we going to do that?" "Grandmama," I said, "I think you are forgetting that a mouse can go places where human beings can't." "That's quite right," she said, "but even a mouse can go creeping around on the tabletop carrying a bottle and sprinkling mouse maker all over the witch's roast beef without being spotted." "I wasn't thinking of doing it in the dining room," I said. "Then where?" she asked. "In the kitchen," I said, "while their food is being got ready." My grandmother stared at me. "My darling child," she said slowly, "I do believe that turning you into mouse had doubled your brain power." "A little mouse," I said, "can go scuttling round the kitchen among the pots and pans, and if he's very careful, no one would ever see him." "Brilliant!" my grandmother cried. "But golly, I think you've got it." "The only thing is," I said, "how will I know which food is theirs? I don't want to put in the wrong saucepan. It would be disastrous if I turned all other guests into mice by mistake, and especially you, Grandmama. Then you just have to creep into the kitchen and find a good hiding place and wait and listen. Just lie there in some dark cranny listening to what the cooks are saying, and then, with a bit of luck, somebody's going to give you a clue. Whenever they have a very big party to cook for, the food is always prepared separately." "Right," I said. "That's what I have to do. I shall wait 3 and shall listen and shall hope for a bit of luck." "It's going to be very dangerous," my grandmother said. "Nobody welcomes a mouse in the kitchen. If they see you, they'll squash you to death." "I won't let them see me," I said. "Don't forget, you'll be carrying the bottle," she said, "so you won't be nearly so quick and nippy." "I can run quite fast, standing up with a bottle in my arms," I said. "I did it just now, don't you remember? I came all the way up from the grand high witch's room carrying it. What about aren't you in the top? She said. That might be difficult to you. Let me try, I said. I took hold of the little bottle and using both my front paws, I found it was able to unscrew the cap quite easily. That's great, my grandmother said. You're really a very clever mouse. She glanced at her watch. At 7:30, she said, I shall to go down to the dining room for supper with you in my handbag. I shall then release you under the table together with a precious bottle, and from then on you'll be on your own. You will have to work your way unseen across the dining room to the door that leads into the kitchen. There will be waiters going in and out of that door all the time. You will have to choose the right moment and nip in behind one of them. But for heaven's sake, be sure that you don't get trodden or not squeezed in the door. I'll try not to, I said, and whatever happens, you mustn't let them catch you. Don't go on about that, Grandmama, you are making me nervous. You are a brave little fellow, she said. I do love you. What shall we do with Bruno? I asked her. Bruno looked up. I'm coming with you, she said, speaking with his mouth full of banana. I'm not going to miss my supper. My grandmother considered this for a moment. I'll take you along, she said, if you promise to stay in my bag and keep absolutely silent. Will you pass food down to me from the table? Bruno asked. Yes, she said, if you promise to behave yourself. Would you like something to eat, my darling? She said to me. No, thank you, I said. I'm too excited to eat, and I've got to keep fit and frisky for the big job ahead. It's a big job, all right, my grandmother said. You'll never do a bigger one. In the kitchen. The time has come, my grandmother said. The great moment has arrived. Are you ready, my darling? It was exactly 7:30. Bruno was in the bowl, finishing that fourth banana. Hang on, he said, just a few more bites. No, my grandmother said, we've got to go. She picked him up and held him tight in her hand. She was very tense and nervous. I had never seen her like that before. I'm going to put you both in my handbag now, she said, but I shall leave the clasp undone. She popped Bruno in it first. I waited, clenching the little bottle to my chest. Now you, she said. She picked me up and gave me a kiss on the nose. Good luck, my darling. Oh, by the way, do you realize you've got a tail, don't you? A what? I said, a tail, a long curly tail. I must say that never occurred to me. I said, good gracious me, so I can see it now. I can actually move it. It's rather grand, isn't it? I mention it only because it might come in useful when you are clumping about in the kitchen. My grandmother said, you can curl it around and can hook it in to things, and you can swing from it and lower yourself to the ground from high places. I wish I'd known this before, I said. I could have practiced using it. Too late now, my grandmother said. We've got to go. She stuffed me into her handbag with Bruno, and at once I took up my usual perch in the small side pocket so that I could poke my head out and see what was going on. My grandmother picked up her walking stick and out she went into the corridor to the lift. She pressed the button and the lift came up and she got in. There was no one in there with us. Listen, she said, I won't be able to talk to you much once we are in the dining room. If you do, people will think I'm dotty and talking to myself. The lift reached the ground floor and stopped with a jerk. My grandmother walked out of it and crossed the lobby of the hotel and entered the dining room. It was a huge room with gold decorations on the ceiling and big mirrors around the walls. The regular guests always had their tables reserved for them, and most of them were already in their places and starting to eat their suppers. Waiters were buzzing about all over the place, carrying plates and dishes. Our table was a small one beside the right-hand wall, about halfway down the room. My grandmother made her way to it and sat down. Peeping out of the handbag, I could see in the very center of the room 2 long tables that were not yet occupied. Each of them carried a notice fixed onto a sort of silver stick, and the notice said, reserved for the members of the RSPCC. My grandmother looked towards the long tables but said nothing. She unfolded her napkin and spread it over the handbag on her lap. Her hand slid under the napkin and took hold of me gently. With the napkin covering me, she lifted me up close to her face and whispered, I am about to put you on the floor under the table. The tablecloths reach almost to the ground, so no one will see you. Have you got hold of the bottle? Yes, I whispered back. I'm ready, Grandmama. Just then, a waiter in a black suit came and stood by our table. I could see his legs from under the napkin, and as soon as I heard his voice, I knew who he was. His name was William. Good evening, madam, he said to my grandmother. Where's the little gentleman tonight? He's not feeling very well, my grandmother said. He's staying in his room. I'm sorry to hear that, William said. Today there is a green pea soup to start with, and for main course you have a choice of either grilled filet or sole or roast lamb. Pea soup and lamb for me, please, my grandmother said. But don't hurry it, William. I'm in no rush tonight. In fact, you can bring me a glass of dry sherry first. Of course, madam, William said, and he went away. My grandmother pretended she had dropped something, and as she bent down, she slipped me out from under the napkin onto the floor under the table. "Go, darling, go," she whispered. Then she straightened it up again. I was on my own now. I stood clasping the little bottle. I knew exactly where the door into the kitchen was. I had to go about halfway round the enormous dining room to reach it. Here goes, I thought, and like a flash I skittled out from beyond their table and made for the wall. I had no intention of going across the dining room floor. I was far too risky. My plan was to cling close to the skirting of the wall all the way around until I reached the kitchen floor. I ran. Oh, how I ran! I don't think anyone saw me. They were all too busy eating. But to reach the floor leading to the kitchen, I had to cross the main entrance of the dining room. I was just about to do this when it poured a great floor of females. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the bottle. At first, I saw only the shoes and ankles of these women who were surging in through the door. But when I glanced up a bit higher, I knew at once who they were. They were the witches coming into dinner. I waited until they had all passed me by. Then I dashed on towards the kitchen door. A waiter opened it to go in. I nipped in after him and hid behind a big garbage bin on the floor. I stayed there for several minutes, just listening to all the talk and the racket. By golly, what a place the kitchen was! The noise and the steam and the clatter of pots and pans. All the cooks all shouting, and the waiters all rushing in and out from the dining room yelling the food orders to the cooks. 4 soups and 2 lambs and 2 fish for table 28, 3 apple pies and 2 raspberry ice creams for number 17. Stuff like that just going at all the time. No far above my head there was a handle sticking out from the side of the garbage bin. Still clutching the bottle, I gave a leap, turned a somersault in the air, and caught hold of the handle with the end of my tail. Suddenly, there was a whinnying to and fro upside down. It was terrific. I loved it. This, I told myself, is how a trapeze artist in a circus must be feel as he goes swishing through the air high up in the circus tent. The only difference was his trapeze could only swing backwards and forwards. My trapeze, my tail, could swing me in any direction I wanted. Perhaps I would become a circus mouse after that. Just then, a waiter came in with a plate in his hand, and I heard him saying, "The old hag on a table 14 says, this meat is too tough. She wants another portion." One of the cooks said, "Give me her plate." I dropped to the floor and peeped round the cabbage bean. I saw the cook scrape the meat off the plate and slap another bit on. Then he said, "Come on, boys, give her some gravy." He carried the plate round to everyone in the kitchen, and do you know what they did? Every one of those cooks and kitchen boys spat onto the old lady's plate. "See how she likes it now," said the cook, handing the plate back to the waiter. Quite soon, another waiter came in and he shouted, "Everyone in the big air SPSCC party wants the soup." That's when I started sitting up and taking notice. I was all ears now. I edged a bit farther round the cabbage bean so that I could see everything that was going on in the kitchen. A man with a tall white hat, who must have been the head chef, shouted, "Put the soup for the big party in the larger silver soup tureen." I saw the head chef place a huge silver basin onto the wooden side bench that ran along the whole length of the kitchen against the opposite wall. Into that silver basin is where the soup is going, I told myself, so that where the stuff in my little bottle must be go as well. I noticed that high up near the ceiling, above side bench, there was a long shelf crammed with saucepan and frying pans. If I can somehow clamber up to that shelf, I thought, then I've got it made. Shall be directly above the silver basin. But first I must somehow get across to the other side of the kitchen and then up to the middle shelf. A great idea came to me. Once again, I jumped up and hooked my tail around the handle of the cabbage bean. Then, hanging upside down, I began to swing. Higher and higher I swung. I was remembering the trapeze artist in the circus I had seen last Easter, and the way he had got the trapeze swinging higher and higher and higher, and had then let go and gone flying through the air. So just at the right moment, at the top of my swing, I let go with my tail and went soaring clear across the kitchen and made a perfect landing on the middle shelf. By golly, I thought, that marvelous thing a mouse can do. And I'm only a beginner. No one had seen me. They were all far too busy with their pots and pans. From the middle shelf, I somehow managed to shiny up a little water pipe in the corner, and in no time at all I was up on the very top shelf, just under the ceiling, among all the saucepans and the frying pans. I knew that no one could possibly see me up there. It was a sober position, and I began working my way along the shelf until I was directly above a big empty silver basin they were going to pour the soup into. I put down my bottle, I unscrewed the top and crept to the edge of the shelf and quickly poured what was it astride into the silver basin below. The next moment, one of the cooks came along with a gigantic saucepan of steaming green soup and poured the whole lot into the silver basin. He put the lid on the basin and shouted, "Soup for a big party, all ready to go out." Then a waiter arrived and carried the silver basin away. I had done it. Even if I never got back alive to my grandmother, the witches were still going to get the mouse maker. I left the empty bottle behind a large saucepan and began working my way back along the top shelf. It was much easier to move about without the bottle. I began using my tail more and more. I swung from the handle, one of saucepan, to the handle of another, all the way along the top shelf, while far below me cooks and waiters were all busting about, and metals were stinging, and pans were spluttering, and pots were boiling, and I thought to myself, "Oh boy, this is the life! What fun is it to be a mouse doing an exciting job like this?" I kept right on swinging. I swung most marvelously from handle to handle, and I was enjoying myself so much that I completely forgot I was in full view of anyone in the kitchen who might happen to glance upwards. What came next happened so quickly I had no time to save myself. I heard a man's voice yelling, "A mouse! Look at that dirty little mouse!" And I caught a glimpse below me of a white-coated figure in a tail, white hat, and then there was a flash of steel as the carving knife whistled through the air, and there was a shoot of pain in the end of my tail, and suddenly I was falling and falling head first towards the floor. Even as I feel, I knew just that had happened. I knew that the tip of my tail had been cut off and that I was about to crash onto the floor, and everyone in the kitchen would be after me. "A mouse!" they were shouting. "A mouse! A mouse! Catch it quick!" I hit the floor and jumped up and ran for my life. All around me there were big black boots going stamp, 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 and I dodged around them and ran, twisting and turning and dodging and swerving across the kitchen floor. "Get it!" they were shouting. "Kill it! Stamp on it! The whole floor seemed to be full of black boots, stamping away at me, and I dodged and swerved and twisted and turned, and then in sheer desperation, hardly knowing what I was doing, wanted only a place to hide, I ran up trouser leg one of the cooks and clung to his sock. "Hey!" the cook shouted. "Jeepers creepers! He's gone up my trousers! Hold on, boys! I'll get him this time." The man hands began slapping at the trousers leg, and now I really was going to get smashed if I didn't move quickly. There was only one way to go, and that was up. I dug my little claws into the hair skin of the man's leg and scalded upwards, higher and higher, past the calf and past the knee, and on to the thigh. "Holy smoke!" the man was yelling. "It's going all the way up. It's going right up my leg." I heard shrieks of laughter coming from the other cooks, but I can promise you I wasn't laughing myself. I was running for my life. The man's hands were slapping all around me, and he was jumping up and down as though he was standing on hot bricks, and I kept climbing and I kept dodging, and very soon I reached the very top of the trouser leg, and there was nowhere else to go. "Help! Help! Help!" the man was screaming. "It's in my kitchen. It's running around in my flaming knickers. Get it out! Somewhere help me to get it out!" "Take off your trousers, you silly slob," someone else shouted. "Pull down your pants and we'll soon catch him." I was in the middle of the man's trousers now, in the place where the two trousers legs meet and the zip begins. It was dark and awfully hot in there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed onward and found the top of the other trouser leg. I went down it like greased lightning, and I came out of the bottom of it, and once again I was on the floor. I had the stupid cook still shouting, "It is in my trousers, get it out! Will somebody please help me to get it out before it bites me?" I caught a flashing glimpse of the entire kitchen across the floor and divided into a sack of potatoes. I burrowed down among the dirty potatoes and held my breath. The cook must have started taking his trousers right off because now they were shouting, "It's not in there, there are no mice there, you silly twerp." "There was, I swear there was," the man was shouting back. "You've never had a mouse in your trousers, you don't know what it feels like." The fact that a tiny little creature like me had caused such a commotion among a bunch of grown-up men gave me a happy feeling. I couldn't help smiling in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed where I was until I was sure they had forgotten about me. Then I kept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the snack. Once again the kitchen was all of a bustle, with cooks and waiters rushing about everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier with a complaint about tough meat commented again. "Hey boys," he shouted. I asked the old hack if he knew a bit of meat was any better, and he said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was really tasty. I had to get out of the kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only one way to do this. I must make a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind one of the waiters. I stayed quite still, watching for my chance. My tail was hurting terribly. I curled it around so as to have a look at it. About 2 inches of it were missing, and it was bleeding quite a lot. There was waiter loading up with a batch of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each hand and 2 more balanced on each arm. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder. I leaped out of the sack of potatoes and went across that kitchen floor and into the dining room like a streak of light, and I didn't stop running until I was underneath my grandmother's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again in those old-fashioned black shoes with their straps and buttons. I shined up on her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandmama," I whispered. "I'm back. I did it. I poured it all into their soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done, you. They are this very moment eating that soup." Suddenly, she withdrew her hands. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "My darling, what's happened to you?" One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife. I whispered back. "It hurts, like Billy." "Let me look at it," she said. She bent her head and examined my tail. "You poor little thing," she whispered. "I'm going to bandage it up with my handkerchief. That will stop the bleeding." She finished a small lace edge handkerchief out of her bag, and this she somehow managed to wrap around the end of my tail. "You'll be all right now," she said. "Just try to forget about it." "Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into their soup?" "Every drop," I said. "Do you think you could put me where I can watch them?" "Yes," she answered. "My handbag in your own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you in there now, and you can peep out as long as you are careful not to be seen. Bruno is there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's keeping him busy for a while." Her hand closed around me. I was lifted off the lap and transferred to the handbag. "Hello, Bruno," I said. "This is the great roll," he said, nibbling away in the bottom of the bag. but I wish there was butter on it. I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches quite clearly sitting at their two long tables in the center of the room. They had finished their soup now, and the waiters were clearing away the plates. My grandmother had lit up one of her disgusting black cigars and was puffing smoke over everything. All around us, the summer holiday guests in this rather grand hotel were babbling away and talking into their suppers. About half of them were old people with walking stick, but were there also plenty of families with the husbands, the wife, and several children. They were all well-to-do people you had to be if you wanted to stay in the Hotel Magnificent. "That's her, Grandmama," I whispered. "That's the Grand High Witch." "I know," my grandmother whispered back. "She's the tiny one in the back, sitting at the end of the nearest table. She could kill anyone in this room with her white-hot sparks." "Look out," my grandmother whispered. "The waiter is coming." I popped down out of sight, and I heard William saying, "Your roast lamb, madam. And which vegetable would you like, peas or carrots?" "Carrots, please," my grandmother said, "but no potatoes." I heard the carrots being dished out. They were a pause. Then my grandmother's voice was whispering, "It's all right, he's gone." I popped my head up again. "Surely no one will notice my little head sticking out like this," I whispered. "No," she answered. "I don't suppose they will. My problem is I've got to talk to you without moving my lips." "You're doing beautifully," I said. "I've counted the witches," she said. "There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you, when you said 100? "It just seemed like 200, I said. "I was wrong too," my grandmother said. "I thought there were a lot more witches than this in England." "How many are there?" I asked. 84, she said. "They were 85, I said, but one of them got fried. At that moment I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight for our table. "Look out, Grandmama," I whispered. "Here comes Bruno father." Mr. Jenkins and his son. Mr. Jenkins came striding up on our table with a very purposeful look on his face. "Where is that grandson of yours?" he said to my grandmother. He spoke rudely and looked very angry. My grandmother put on her frostiest look, but didn't answer him. "My guess is that he and my son Bruno are up to some development," Mr. Jenkins went on. "Bruno hasn't turned up for his supper, and it takes a lot to make that boy miss his food. I must admit he has a very healthy appetite," my grandmother said. "My feeling is that is on "This is swell," Mr. Jenkins said. "I don't know who the devil you are, and I don't much care, but you played a nasty trick on me and my wife this afternoon. You put a dirty little mouse on the table. That makes me think all three of you are up to something, so if you know where Bruno's hiding, kindly tell me at once." "That was no trick I played on you," my grandmother said. "That mouse I tried to give you was your own little boy, Bruno. I was being kind to you. I was trying to restore him to the bosom of his family. You refused to take him in." "What the blazes do you mean, madam?" shouted Mr. Jenkins. "My son isn't a mouse." His back moustache was jumping up and down like crazy as he spoke. "Come on, woman, where's he? Out with it." The family at the table nearest to us had all stopped eating and were staring at Mr. Jenkins. My grandmother sat there puffing away calmly at her black cigar. "I can well understand your anger, Mr. Jenkins," she said. "Any other English father would be just as cross as you are. But over in Norway, where I came from, we are quite used to this sort of happenings. We have learned to accept them as part of everyday life." "You must be mad, woman," cried Mr. Jenkins. "Where's Bruno? If you don't tell me at once, I shall summon the police." "Bruno is a mouse," my grandmother said, calm as ever. "He most certainly is not a mouse," shouted Mr. Jenkins. "Oh, yes, I am," Bruno said, poking his head up out of the handbag. Mr. Jenkins leapt about 3 feet into the air. "Hello, Dad," Bruno said. He had a silly sort of mousy grin on his face. Mr. Jenkins' mouth dropped open so wide I could see the gold fillings in his back teeth. "Don't worry, Dad," Bruno went on. "It's not as bad as all that, just so long as the cat doesn't scare me." "Bruno," stammered Mr. Jenkins. "No more school," said Bruno, grinning as broad as a shy mouse grin. "No more homework. I shall live in the kitchen cupboard and feast on raisins and honey." "Bruno," stammered Mr. Jenkins again, "how did it happen?" The poor man had no wind left in his sails at all. "Witches," my grandmother said. "The witches did it." "I can't have a mouse for a son," shrieked Mr. Jenkins. "You've got me," Bruno said. "Mr. Jenkins will go crazy," yelled Mr. Jenkins. "She can't stand the things. She'll just have to get used to him." My grandmother said, "I hope you don't keep a cat in the mouse." We do," cried Mr. Jenkins. "Topsy is my wife's favorite creature." "Then you just have to get rid of Topsy," my grandmother said. "Your son is more important than your cat." "He certainly is," Bruno shouted from inside the handbag. "You tell Mom she's got to get rid of Topsy before I go home." By now, half the dining room was watching our little group. Knives and forks and spoons had been put down, and all over the place heads were turning round to stare at Mr. Jenkins as he stood there spluttering and shouting. They couldn't see neither Bruno or me, and they were wondering what all the fuss was about. "By the way," my grandmother said, "would you like to know who did this to him?" There was a mischievous little smile on her face, and I could see that she was about to get Mr. Jenkins into trouble. "Who?" he cried. "Who did?" "That woman over there," my grandmother said, "the small one in the black dress at the head of the long table." "She's RSPCC," cried Mr. Jenkins. "She's the chairwoman." "No, she's not," my grandmother said. "She's the Grand High Witch of all the world." "You mean she did it in that skinny little woman over there?" shouted Mr. Jenkins, pointing at her with a long finger. "My bad. I'll have my lawyers stone her for this. I'll make her pay through the nose." "I wouldn't anything rash," my grandmother said to him. "That woman has magic powers. She might decide to turn you into something even sillier than a mouse, a cockroach perhaps." "Turn me into cockroach?" shouted Mr. Jenkins, puffing out his chest. "I'd like to see her try." He swung around and started marching across the dining room towards the Grand High Witch stable. My grandmother and I watched him. Bruno had jumped up to our table and was also watching his father. Practically everyone in the dining room was watching Mr. Jenkins now. I stayed where I was, peeping out of my grandmother's handbag. I thought it might be wiser to stay put. The triumph. Mr. Jenkins had not gone more than a few paces towards the Grand High Witch table when a piercing scream rose high about all the other noses in the room, and at the same moment I saw the Grand High Witch go shooting up into the air. Now she was standing on her chair, still screaming. Now she was on the tabletop, waving her arms. "What on earth happened, Grandmama?" "Wait," my grandmother said. "Keep quiet and watch." Suddenly, all the other witches, more than 80 of them, were beginning to scream and jump out of their seats as those spikes were being stuck into their bottoms. Some were standing on chairs, Some were up on the tables, and all of them were wiggling about and waving their arms in the most extraordinary manner. Then, all at once, they became quiet. Then they sniffed. Every single witch stood there as stiff and silent as a corpse. The whole room became deadly still. "They are shrieking, Grandmama," I said. "They are shrieking just like I did." "I know they are," my grandmother said. "It's the mouse maker," I cried. "Look, some of them are growing fur on their faces." "Why is it working so quickly, Grandmama?" "I'll tell you why," my grandmother said. "Because all of them have had massive overdoses, just like you. It's thrown the alarm clock right out of whack." Everyone in the dining room was standing up now to get a better view. People were moving closer. They were beginning to crowd around the two long tables. My grandmother lifted Bruno and me up so that we wouldn't miss any of the fun. In her excitement, she jumped up onto her chair so that she could see over the heads of the crowd. In another few seconds, all the witches had completely disappeared, and the tops of the two long tables were swarming with small brown mice. All over the dining room, women were screaming and strong men were turning white in the face and shouting, "It's crazy! This can't happen! Let's get the heck out of here quick!" Waiters were attacking the mice with chairs and iron bottles and anything else that came to hand. I saw a chef in a tall white hat rushing out from the kitchen, brandishing a frying pan, and Mother and another just behind him was whittling a carving knife above his head, and everyone was yelling, "Mice, mice, mice!" We must get rid of the mice. Only the children in the room were really enjoying it. They all seemed to know instinctively that something good was going on right there in front of them, and they were clapping and cheering and laughing like mad. "It's time to go," my grandmother said. "Our work is done." She got down off her chair and picked up her handbag and slung it over her arm. She had me in her right hand and Bruno in her left. "Bruno," she said, "the time has come to restore you to the famous bosom of your family." "My mom is not very crazy about mice," Bruno said. "So I noticed," my grandmother said. "She'll just have to get used to you, won't she?" It was not difficult to find Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. You could hear Mrs. Jenkins' shrill voice all over the room. "Herbert!" It was screaming. "Herbert, get me out of there! There's mice everywhere. They go up my skirts." She had her arms tied around her husband, and from there I was she seemed to be swinging from his neck. My grandmother advanced upon them and thrust Bruno into Mr. Jenkins' head. "Here's your little boy," she said. "She needs to go on a diet." "Hi, Dad," Bruno said. "Hi, Mom." Mr. Jenkins screamed even louder. My grandmother, with me in her hand, turned and marched out of the room. She went straight across the hotel lobby and out through the front entrance into the open air. Outside it was a lovely warm evening, and I could hear the waves breaking on the beach just across the road from the hotel. "Is there a taxi here?" my grandmother said to the tall doorman in his green uniform. "Certainly, madam," he said, and he put 2 fingers into his mouth and blew a long shrill whistle. I watched him very envy. For weeks I had been trying to whistle like that, but I hadn't succeeded once. Now I never would. The taxi came. The driver was an oldish man with a thick black drooping moustache. The moustache hung over his mouth like the roots of some plant. "Where to, madam?" he asked. Suddenly he caught sight of me, a little mouse, nestling in my grandmother's hand. "Blimey," he said, "what's that?" "It's my grandson," my grandmother said. "Drive us to the station, please." "I always liked mice," the old taxi driver said. "I used to keep hundreds of them when I was a boy. Mice is the fastest breeders in the world. Did you know that, madam? If it's your grandson, then I reckon you'll be having a few great-grandsons to go with him in a couple of weeks' time." "Drive us to the station, please," my grandmother said, looking grim. "Yes, madam," he said, "right away." My grandmother got into the back of the taxi and sat down and put me on the lap. "Are we going home?" I asked her. "Yes," she answered, "back to Norway." "Hooray!" I cried. "Oh, hooray, hooray! I thought you'd like that," she said. "But what about our luggage?" "Who cares about luggage?" she said. The taxi was driving through the streets of Bournemouth, and this was the time of the day when the pavements were crowded with holiday makers, all wandering about aimlessly with nothing to do. "How are you feeling, my darling?" my grandmother said. "Fine," I said, "quite marvelous." She began stroking the fur on the back of my neck and the finger. "We have accomplished great feats today," she said. "It's been terrific," I said, "absolutely terrific." The heart of a mouse. It was lovely to be back Norway once again in my grandmother's fine old house. But now that I was so small, everything looked different, and it took me quite a while to find my way around. Mine was a world of carpets and table legs, and chair legs, and the little crannies behind large pieces of furniture. A closed door could not be opened, and nothing could be reached that wasn't a table. But after a few days, my grandmother began to invent gadgets for me in order to make life a bit easier. She got a carpenter to put together a number of slim tall step ladders, and she placed one of these against each table in the house so that I could climb up whenever I wanted to. She herself invented a wonderful door opening device made out of wires and springs and pulleys with heavy weights turning on cords, and soon every door in the house had a door opener on it. All I had to do to press my front paws onto a tiny wooden platform, and he presto, a spring would stretch and weight would drop, and the door would swing open. Next, she rigged up an equally ingenious system whereby I could switch on the light whenever I entered a room at night. I cannot explain how it worked because I know nothing about electricity, but there was a little button let into the floor near the door in every room in the house, and when I pressed the button gently with one paw, the light would come on. When I pressed in a second time, the light would go off again. My grandmother made me a tiny toothbrush using matchstick for the handle, and into this the thick little piece of bristle that she had snipped off one of her hairbrushes. "You must get any holes in your teeth," she said. "I can't take a mouse to a dentist. He'd think I was crazy." "It's funny," I said, "but ever since I became a mouse, I've hated the taste of sweets and chocolate, so I don't think I'll get any holes." "You are still going to brush your teeth every meal," my grandmother said, and I did. For a bath tube, she gave me a silver sugar basin, and I bathed in it every night before going to bed. She allowed no one else into the house, not even a servant or a cook. We kept entirely to ourselves, and we were very happy in each other's company. One evening, as I lay on my grandmother's lap in front of the fire, she said to me, "I wonder what happened to that little Bruno. I wouldn't be surprised if his father gave him to the hall porter to drown in the fire bucket." I answered, "I'm afraid you might be right." My grandmother said, "The poor little thing." We were silent for a few minutes, my grandmother puffing away at her black cigar while I dozed comfortably in the warmth. "Can I ask you something, Grandmama?" I said. "Ask me anything you like, my darling." "How long does a mouse live?" Oh, she said, I've been waiting for you to ask me that. There was a silence. She sat there, smoking away and gazing at the fire. Well, I said, how long do we live as mice? I have been reading about mice, she said. I have been trying to find out everything I can about them. Go on then, Grandmama. Why don't you tell me? If you really want to know, she said, I'm afraid a mouse doesn't live for a very long time. How long? I asked. Well, an ordinary mouse only lives for about 3 years, she said. But you are not an ordinary mouse. You're a mouse person, and that is a very different matter. How different? I asked. How long does a mouse person live, Grandmama? Longer, she said, much longer. How much longer? I asked. A mouse person will almost certainly live for 3 times as long as ordinary mouse, my grandmother said. About 9 years. Good, I cried. That's great. It's the best news I've ever had. Why did you say that? She asked, surprised. Because I would never want to live longer than you, I said. I couldn't stand being looked after by anyone else. There was a short silence. She had a way of folding me behind the ears with the tip of the finger. It felt lovely. How old are you, Grandmama? I asked. I'm 86, she said. Will you live another 8 or 9 years? I might, she said, with a pick of a lock. You have got to, I said, because by then I'll be a very old mouse and you'll be a very old grandmother. And soon after that we'll both die together. That would be perfect, she said. I had a little dose after that. I just shut my eyes and threw of nothing and felt at peace with the world. Would you like me to tell you something about yourself that is very interesting? My grandmother said. Yes, please, Grandmama, I said, without opening my eyes. I couldn't believe it at first, but apparently it's quite true, she said. What is this? I asked. The heart of a mouse, she said, and that means your heart is beating at the rate of 500 times a minute. Isn't that amazing? That's not possible, I said, opening my eyes wide. It is true, as I'm sitting here, she said. It's a sort of miracle. That's nearly 9 beats every second, I cried, working it out in my head. Correct, she said. Your heart is going so fast, it's impossible to hear the separate beats. All one hears is a soft humming sound. She was wearing a lace dress, and the lace kept ticking my nose. I had to rest my head on my front paws. Have you ever heard my heart humming away, Grandmama, I asked her. Often, she said. I heard when you are lying very close to me on the pillow at night. The two of us remained silent in front of the fire for a long time after that, thinking about these wonderful things. My darling, she said at last, are you sure you don't mind Minnie Mouse for the rest of your life? I don't mind at all, I said. It doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, so long as somebody loves you. It's off to work we go. For supper that evening, my grandmother had a plain omelette and one slice of bread. I had a piece of that brown Norwegian goat's milk cheese known as shallots, which I had loved even when I was a boy. We ate in front of the fire, my grandmother in her armchair, and me on the table with my cheese on a small plate. Grandmama, I said, now what we have done away with the Grand High Witch, but all the other witches in the world gradually disappear. I'm quite sure they won't, she answered. I stopped chewing and stared at her. But they must, I cried. Surely they must. I'm afraid not, she said. But if she's not there any longer, how are they going to get all the money they need? And who is going to give them orders and jazz them up at the annual meetings and invent all their magic formulas for them? When a queen bee dies, there is always another queen in the hive ready to take her place, my grandmother said. It's the same with witches. In the great headquarters where the Grand High Witch lives, there is always another High Witch waiting in the wings to take over should anything happen. Oh no, I cried. What means everything when it was for nothing? I know, I cried. We saved the children of England, she said. I don't call that nothing. But that's not nearly good enough, I said. I felt sure that all the witches of the world would slowly fade away after we had got rid of their ladder. Now you tell me that everything is going to go on just the same as before. Not exactly as before, my grandmother said. For instance, there are no longer any witches in England. That's quite a triumph, isn't it? But what about the rest of the world? I cried. What about America and France and Holland and Germany? And what about Norway? You must not think I have been sitting back and doing nothing else last few days, she said. I have been giving a great deal of thought at the time to that particular problem. I was looking up her face when she said this, and all at once I noticed that a little secret smile was beginning to spread slowly around her eyes, and she at the corner of her mouth. "Why are you smiling, Grandmama?" I asked her. "I have some rather interesting news for you," she said. "What's news?" "Shall I tell you into your right from the beginning?" "Yes, please," I said. "I like good news," she said. She had finished her omelette, and I had enough of my cheese. She wiped her lips with a napkin and said, "As soon as we arrived back in Norway, I picked up the telephone and made a call to England." "Who in England, Grandmama?" "To the chief of police in Bournemouth, my darling. I told him I was the chief of police for the whole of Norway, and that I was interested in the peculiar happenings that had taken place recently in the Hotel Magnificent." "Now, hang on a sec," Grandmother said. "There is no way an English policeman is going to believe that you are head of the Norwegian police." "I'm very good at imitating a man's voice," she said. "Of course he believed me." The policeman in Bournemouth was honored to get a call from the chief of police for the whole of Norway. "So what did you ask him?" "I asked him for the name and address of the lady who had been living in room 454 in the Hotel Magnificent, the one who disappeared." "You mean the Grand High Witch?" I cried. "Yes, my darling." "And did he give it to you?" "Naturally, he gave it to me. One policeman will always help another policeman." "But golly, you've got a nerve, Grandmama. I wanted her dress," my grandmama said. "But did he know her address?" "He did indeed." They had found her passport in her room, and her address was in it. I was also in the hotel register. Everyone who stays in the hotel has to put a name and address into the book. But surely the Grand High Witch wouldn't have put her real name and address in the hotel register, I said. "Why ever not?" my grandmother said. "Nobody in the world has the faintest idea who she was except the other witches. Wherever she went, the people simply knew her as a saint and nice lady. You, my darling, and you alone were the only non-witch ever to see her with her mask off. Even in her home district, in the village where she lived, people knew her as a kindly and very wealthy baroness who have large sums of money to charity. I have checked up on that." I was getting excited now. "And that address you got, Grandmama, must have been the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch." "It still is." my grandmother said, and that will be where the new Grand High Witch is certain to believe in. And this very moment, with your red tune of special assistance witches. Important rules are always surrounded by a large retinue of assistants. Where's her headquarters, Grandmama? I cried. Tell me quick where it is. It is a castle, my grandmother said. And the fascinating thing is that the castle will be all the names, how else could, they summon the witches of the various countries for the annual meetings. Where is the castle, Grandmama? I cried impatiently. Which country? Tell me quick. Guess, she said. Norway, I cried. Right first time, she answered. High up in the mountains, above a small village. This was really news. Did a little dance of an excitement of the tabletop. My grandmother was getting pretty worked up herself, and now she heaved herself out of her chair and began pacing up and down the room, trampling the carpet with her stick. So we have to work to do, you and I, she cried out. We have a great task ahead of us. Thank heavens you're a mouse. A mouse can go anywhere. And I'll have to do this. Put you down somewhere near the Grand High Witch Castle, and you will very easily be able to get inside it and creep around, looking and listening to your heart's content. I will, I answered. No one will ever see me. Moving about in a big castle will be the child's play compared with going into a crowded kitchen full of cooks and waiters. You could spend days in there if it's necessary. My grandmother cried. In her excitement, she was waving her stick all over the place, and suddenly she knocked over a tall and very beautiful vase that went crashing onto the floor and smashed a million pieces. Forget it, she said. It's only me. You could spend weeks in that castle if you wanted to, and they'd never know you were there. I myself would get a room in the village, and you could sneak out of the castle and have supper with me every night and tell me what was going on. I could, I cried out. And inside the castle I could go snooping around simply everywhere. But your main job, of course, my grandmother said, would be to destroy every witch in the place. That you really would be end of the whole organization. May I destroy then? I cried. How could I do that? Can't you guess? She said. Mouse maker, my grandmother shouted. Formula 86 delayed action mouse maker all over again. You will feel it to everyone in the castle by putting drops of into their food. You do remember the recipe, don't you? Every bit of it, I answered. You mean we're going to make it ourselves? Why not? She cried. If they make it, so can we. It's just a question of knowing what goes into it. We're going to climb up the tall trees to get the countless egg, I asked her. She will. I will. I do it myself. There's plenty of life in this old dog yet. I think I'd better do that part of it, Grandmama. You might come a cropper. Those are just details, she cried, waving her stick again. We shall let nothing stand in our way. And what happened after that? I asked her, after the new Grand High Witch and everyone else in the castle have been turned into mice? Then the castle will be completely empty, and I shall come in and join you and... Wait, I cried. Hold on, Grandmama, I've just had a nasty thought. What a nasty thought, I said. When the mouse maker turned me into a mouse, I said. Didn't become just an old ordinary mouse that you catch with mouse traps. I became a talking, thinking, intelligent mouse person who wouldn't go near a mouse trap. My grandmother stopped dead in her tracks. She already knew what was coming next. Therefore, I went on. If we use the mouse maker to turn the new Grand High Witch and all the other witches in the castle into mice, the whole place will be swarming with very clever, very nasty, very dangerous, talking, thinking mouse witches. They'll all be witches in mouse's clothing. And that, I added, could be very horrible indeed. By golly, you are right, she cried. That never occurred to me. I couldn't possibly take on a cast full of mouse witches, I said. Nor could I, she said. They'd have to be got rid of at once. They'd have to be smashed and bashed and chopped into little pieces, exactly as they were in the Hotel Magnificent. I'm not doing that, I said. I couldn't anyway. I don't think you could either, Grandmama. And mouse traps wouldn't be the slightest use, by the way, I added. The Grand High Witch who did me was wrong about mouse traps, wasn't she? Yes, yes, my grandmother said impatiently. I'm not concerned with that Grand High Witch. She's been chopped up long ago by the hotel chef. It's the new Grand High Witch we've got to deal now. The one up in the castle and all her assistant. A Grand High Witch is bad enough when she's disguised as a lady. But just think of what she could do if she were a mouse. She could go everywhere. I've got it, I shouted, leaping about a foot in the air. I've got the answer. Tell me, my grandmother snapped. The answer is cats, I shouted. Bring all the cats. My grandmother stared at me. Then a great grin spread over her face, and she shouted, It's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Show half a dozen cats into the castle, I cried, and they'll kill every mouse in the place in 5 minutes. I don't care how clever they are. "You're a magician," my grandmother shouted, starting to wave her thick about once again. "Look out for the vases, Grandmama." "To check with the vases," she shouted. "I'm so thrilled, I don't care if I break the lot." "Just one thing," I said. "You got to make absolutely sure I'm well out of the way myself before you put the cats in." "That's a promise," she said. "That will we do after the cats have killed all the mice?" I asked. "I'll take all the cats back to the village, and then you and I will have the castle completely to ourselves." "And then?" I said. "Then we shall go through the records, and then the names and addresses of all the witches in the whole wide world." "And after that?" I said, quivering with excitement. "After that, my darling, the greatest task of all will begin for you and me. We shall pack our bags and go traveling all over the world. In every country we visit, we shall seek out of the houses where the witches are living. We shall find each house one by one, and having found it, you will creep inside and leave your little drops of deadly mouse maker in the bread, or the cornflakes, or the rice pudding, or whatever food you see lying about. It will be a triumph, my darling, a colossal, unbeatable triumph. We shall do it entirely by ourselves, just you and me. That will be our work for the rest of our lives." My grandmother picked me up off the table and kissed me on one nose. "Oh my goodness me, we're going to be busy this next few years and months," she cried. "I think we are," I said. "But what fun and excitement it's going to be." "You can say that again," my grandmother cried, giving me another kiss. "I can't wait to get started." The end.